Hi there, everybody. My name is Angelica, and I am the social media editor for Canadian Geographic. I want to say welcome and thank you to everybody who is joining us today. We're here with Canadian Space Agency astronaut Jeremy Hansen for an awesome opportunity to hear his take on the SpaceX Demo-2 launch last week. Jeremy has been a part of the CSA since 2009, and he may be the next Canadian in space, fingers crossed, right? He has been working and training at NASA since then, and in 2017 became the first Canadian astronaut to lead a NASA astronaut class. Born in London, Ontario, Jeremy was previously a CF-18 fighter pilot in the Royal Canadian Air Force, and he's speaking with us today from Houston, Texas, where he works and lives. Hi, Jeremy. Thanks for joining us today.
It's my pleasure, Angelica. Thanks for putting this together.
We're very excited to have you, and we got a number of great questions from our CanGeo followers on social media, as well as from our staff. So our first question is, what was your role during last week's launch, and what was it like to be involved in the mission?
Yeah, I had a pretty neat role last week. It was the same role as all of you. I was a spectator for the launch, so nothing really specific other than doing some media interviews and some social media outreach just to explain what's going on. That's kind of how it works with the astronaut program. We divvy up different responsibilities, and I'm just not that involved in the actual SpaceX vehicle myself. But one of my colleagues, Josh Kutrick, he's very much involved. He was part of the ISS, so the International Space Station mission control team for the SpaceX flight, which means he was working directly with the crew when they were approaching to dock the International Space Station, which was pretty fun to watch him work through that and to be talking directly to the crew during that. That was neat. David St. Jacques, for example, when he was on board, he was part of the initial test for the SpaceX vehicle when it didn't have crew members on it the first time it went to the International Space Station. So there's been some involvement, which has been pretty neat to watch.
Now, one of the big things that obviously happened with the launch was that it was initially canceled due to the weather conditions. Why do those conditions have to be so precise, and how can the organization best plan to adapt to them?
Yeah, so this is not my area of expertise, but I'll give you my layman's point of view on weather and what we're looking for at the Cape. And from what I understand of the situation that caused us to scrub the first day, really what we're watching out for is flight through lightning or thunderstorms. And there's one other situation with lightning, which it may not be obvious to all of us, but it would be on a day when there would be no lightning, but you have cloud that's thick enough and has enough moisture that if you fly a rocket through it at extremely high velocities, you can generate basically enough static electricity to cause a lightning strike. This actually happened during one of the Apollo missions. I'd have to think which one it was. I don't know, maybe it was 12. I don't remember off the top of my head, but they had a lightning strike on one of the Apollo missions, and it actually affected the spacecraft, but they were able to recover and continue the mission, obviously. So it's not talked about broadly, but we certainly learned a lot about it from that lightning strike, and we realized very dangerous for our spacecraft to generate that. And of course, launching out of Florida, it's pretty common to have lots of cloud, lots of moisture, and so this often is an issue for our launches. If you think back to the space shuttle, there were a lot of space shuttle scrubs due to wet weather. And it's just because, we don't want to launch a rocket and then catastrophically lose it on the way to orbit. Now, what was something that was neat about the SpaceX vehicle compared to Space Shuttle was our ability to abort during the launch. And that just means that the capsule has the ability to eject off the top of the rocket and to save the crew if we do have a disastrous situation. A failure of the rocket, for example. And we didn't really have that with Space Shuttle. We had some backup options for trying to fly the Space Shuttle to a runway somewhere, but if we had a catastrophic failure, it was really risky for the crew. There was also the option of them actually jumping out the side hatch once it got low level and was slow enough that they could safely parachute out themselves, but that was super, super risky. So we have a much higher level of safety on these new vehicles, which is neat.
I'm glad no one could see my face when you said jump out the side hatch. That was a little extreme to me. Now, being all psyched up and geared up and you're ready to go, you're literally strapped to a rocket and then it's called. How does your training prepare you for that moment?
Oh boy, I don't know that your training really prepares you. I mean, we all face these things with life in general. I mean, I felt it myself. I wasn't even there, but I just felt, I was all geared up, ready for them to launch. And then when they scrubbed, it's a bit of an emotional roller coaster. I was thinking about their families. They're there, they're watching it, they're feeling all of that emotion, and of course the crew. They're strapped in, they're sitting there. I don't know what really prepares you other than professionalism. The closest thing I'd say that we have to this regularly is flying. We do a lot of flight training in the astronaut program because flying airplanes is very, very real. You're managing real risk. You're making true, actual you're making gray decisions actually, when you don't know exactly what the right answer is to manage the risk. So we use aviation a lot to train astronauts. And aviation requires a lot of self-discipline. There's a lot of times you're like, I have this plan, I'm supposed to be at this place, I want to fly there. And you have to have the self-discipline to say, no, the weather just doesn't support this today. I'm going to make the hard call and do the right thing. We have a great saying in aviation: it's better to be on the ground wishing you were in the air than to be in the air wishing you were on the ground. And that's a good one to live by.
I love that saying. That's a great one to have there. Now, moving away a little bit from the launch specifically, what place do you see for Canada as part of the Artemis program, and what role do you think we might play on the road to a mission to Mars? That was a question submitted to us by Maxine Couture.
Yeah, boy, there's a lot. That's a fun question to think about. There's a lot there. So Maxine probably already knows that Canada committed to joining NASA on the Gateway program. And the Gateway is very much a part of the Artemis program. And so Gateway is setting up the space station in lunar orbit. And there's a little bit of confusion about how Gateway fits into all of this. And it's kind of driven by the fact that, NASA, the United States, has set the goal of flying the first woman and the next man to the surface of the moon by 2024, even if that doesn't involve Gateway. However, there's broad understanding amongst all of us in the international partnership that going back to the moon in a sustainable manner and setting up a reusable transportation infrastructure to support future exploration on the moon will involve Gateway, needs to involve Gateway. And that's our initial role, is supporting Gateway. Pretty neat stuff. We're building the next generation of Canadarm. So I wouldn't want people to make the mistake of thinking we're just going to build a replica of Canadarm2 and put it in deep space around the moon. It's nothing like that. This is a significant engineering challenge for us in Canada. We have to do these robotic operations with high latency. And latency is the time it takes to communicate with something that far away. And so what it means for us is we have to have a much more autonomous system than we have right now. In fact, we anticipate needing the robotic arm to be moving when we can't even watch it from the ground with video or have data on the ground. We're going to have to trust it to do its job without the oversight of humans. And that is something we have never done in space before with space robotics. We are also biting off some advanced research and engineering with respect to artificial intelligence around this. And so, it's not exactly HAL from 2001 out there making decisions about what the robotic arm will do, but we do anticipate using artificial intelligence to help us design the maneuvers ahead of time to simplify that process so that we can then hand them off to the autonomous system to execute them and and make decisions, not make decisions, but follow its algorithm in deep space. So that's the robotics piece. It's really exciting for us because it's a big challenge. It's a very real challenge. Kind of like going back to the first Canadarm with Space Shuttle. When Canada built that first one, you have to remember, space robotics had never been done before. We were the first ones to do it. And now we're being asked to do something new in the space robotics realm again, which I think really suits us, suits the expertise and experience that we have, and it's a great challenge for us. There's a number of other things we're doing as well. We have a cool program called LEAP. LEAP is the Lunar Exploration Accelerator Program. And this is allowing a number of different companies in Canada to basically look at ways that they can support lunar surface operations. And so we're working on that and enabling research and innovation in that sector, which is really important for the future of Canada's space program. And they're in the medical field. We're also looking at leveraging, again, some of the latest technology and artificial intelligence to basically help develop new methodologies to delivering healthcare in remote places, like on the way to the moon, on the way to Mars, on the surface of the moon. But more importantly, probably, I mean, from I think all of our perspectives, is working with other government bodies, both provincial and national, to deliver, to improve our capability to deliver healthcare services in isolated parts of Canada. I think COVID-19 is really interesting, the impact it's had on all of us for trying to learn how to do things remotely. We're learning a lot, and we just need to keep innovating and trying to improve the way we can deliver services remotely.
Now, as you know, Canadian Geographic and the Royal Canadian Geographical Society have a huge educational component to what we do. And so, of course, one of the questions we got from one of our students is, what path should students take to get to where you are right now?
Yeah, such an important question to ask yourself. If, no matter what you want to do in life, whether you want to be part of our space team, whether you actually want to go to space or support us with science and engineering from the ground, or no matter what you want to do, I would tell you the most important thing you can do right now is be passionate. Be out there and always challenging yourself. So it's kind of easy to stay in your comfort zone and do the things you've always done, but look for areas of interest and then push yourself on a daily basis to go try something new. That's probably the most important kind of habit pattern you can get into, is constant growth. And now I'm gonna, that's kind of the caveat that kind of wraps around everything I'm about to say, but I'm gonna tell you about 3 areas that I think are important for you to consider. So one is, obviously, I think it's obvious to you, it's academics. You're gonna need a strong academic background to be either an astronaut or someone who's working on the huge team of people that make space exploration possible. So finding things you love in academics and pursuing that through a university program, I think that's an important first step. The next thing I would tell you is developing what I call operational skills. And what that means is that you're challenging yourself in in ways where you have to start learning to be a decision maker. So a good place that started happening for me was in the Air Cadet program in Canada, where I was learning to be a leader at a very young age, and also learning to be a pilot at the age of 16 with the Air Cadet program. I was having to make decisions that pilots make, and this was important operational decision-making skills for me. But it doesn't have to be Air Cadets. It could be sports teams. It could be, I often talk about backcountry backpacking, for example, just getting out into nature. If you truly, make a habit of getting out into nature, you will put yourself in situations where you have to make decisions that at least affect your comfort, if not your safety. And those are just important confidence building experiences that you should be having as a young individual preparing for these types of challenges. So that was the second one. That's operational skills. And the third one is team skills. We talk a lot about team skills in the astronaut corps. We call them expeditionary skills, but it's the same thing. And it's really about how you integrate with other people. Are you able to listen to other people? Do you have empathy? Are you a good team player? Are you a really good listener and a good communicator? Or are you spending more time talking than listening? Important things to consider, and just start working on a little bit at a time, just always trying to improve yourself in the area of teamwork, because it's very, very important. If I'm going to select 5 other people to go on a mission into deep space and be locked in a tin can for 6 months or 2.5 years if we're going to Mars and coming back, they're going to have to be competent. They're going to have operational skills. They're going to have to know what they're doing. But probably the biggest make or break component of that team is going to be how we work together. That's going to be the most important thing.
It's funny you say that you were flying planes when you were 16, because my mom didn't want to let me drive when I was 16. Your parents let you go up into the skies. So we probably grew up very differently, but my parents are, I'm just kidding. So one of our other questions here that we got is, how will the Canadian Space Agency benefit from space flight going in a commercial direction?
Yeah, this is, I think it's all great news for Canada, Canadian space projects. You know, one of the things that's probably obvious to most Canadians is where Canada has not been in the business of launching rockets. We don't have rockets that we launch into orbit anyway. We have some, great endeavors going on right now to build a spaceport in Canada. This is, excellent news, a great goal. Love to see that happen. But we don't have any of our Canadian companies that are actually building the rockets in Canada itself. And so any advancement that is made with respect to launching things from the surface of the planet into space, all of that translates into benefit for Canadian space industry. So this is very, very positive for us. And I'm not talking about just from, an astronaut point of view. I'm talking about from all of the space endeavors, well, all countries, most countries in the world are leveraging space in one way or another, but certainly in Canada, we are using space in a lot of different ways to deliver services to Canadians. And this is only going to expand in the future. And what it means is all of these things are going to get cheaper. I think the cost is already coming down, but certainly, only a couple years ago, if you were developing a large project, for example, that you wanted to launch stuff into space and use it to deliver services on the planet, typically about half the cost of your project is launching. So like if you have a $500 million satellite program, you probably have to spend another $500 million launching it historically. And those costs are coming down, and it's becoming more competitive, and we expect they're just going to keep coming down. And so this is really good news for all of humanity, because it means we can get smarter and cheaper about how we use space. So I think the commercial aspects of it are very, very important. As an astronaut, it's awesome. It means we're going to have more vehicles flying people into space, and not just professional government astronauts, but we anticipate having passengers going to space, and having commercial astronauts go to space. So this is, I think, great news for everybody, much more opportunity. Just to frame it for you, SpaceX, just launched people this past weekend, but we have a Boeing rocket we're working on right now. It's going to be launching people. That's coming up. Should be another test flight of that later this year. We're working on the heavy lift rocket called the SLS, which has an Orion capsule on top of it, which is made to go back to the moon and into deep space. So we're working on that. That's going to be launching humans. We still have the Russian Soyuz rocket that we're using to fly humans to the International Space Station. And so all of these things are coming to fruition. We know that, for example, Blue Origin, you probably know of Amazon, and the owner of Amazon, Jeff Bezos, well, he has another company called Blue Origin, and they're working on an orbital rocket to fly humans into orbit. They're going to start with suborbital flights, which means you fly up and then you fall back down to Earth. And so they have a reusable rocket that does that right now. They're anticipating flying passengers on that this year, but they're building a larger reusable rocket to fly humans into orbit. So we anticipate that's coming down the pipe. So, especially young Canadians, you should be looking at this with this should be popping your imagination wide open. The future of space, how we use it, and who's going and how many people are going, is going to change drastically over the next decade. So a lot of opportunity out there. But if opportunity is just that, it's opportunity. You have to seize it. Even as a country, Canada has to seize it. We have a history of seizing opportunity in the space realms, where we've carved out a really neat niche for us in international space relations. But we have to be vigilant and keep looking for building those jobs of the future, and ensuring that young Canadian minds today have those opportunities. And that was what was most exciting to me about our Gateway commitment, for example, is that is creating a lot of opportunity and actually seizing opportunity for Canadians.
One day we'll need a social media editor on the space station, and I'll be the one to go for sure.
Absolutely, and I think you say that half jokingly, but I honestly believe, we've already seen Guy Liberté, for example, from Cirque du Soleil. He flew in space, and very much an artist. And, that was wonderful to see space through the lens of an artist. And, all different spectrums of humanity, it's going to open up. We're going to have different people flying in space with kind of different mentalities. And, people with my kind of mentality, personality, will probably still be doing things like flying the spacecraft, but there'll be other people going up there and just leveraging that beautiful experience and sharing it with people. I think that is really, really important. And, the one thought I've always had is the more people that fly in space and then to look back on our planet, I think the better for humanity as a whole, because I haven't done it yet. I'm still waiting to fly in space, but it's so obvious when I speak to my colleagues about their experience that you come back changed, your perspective has changed. And even if you left the planet with a healthy respect for international cooperation and a sense of taking care of our planet, and we're all in this together, you definitely come back with a renewed passion for it. And I think that's just good for humanity.
I have a question here actually that came in from someone watching on Facebook. Her name is Gabriella and she's 5 years old. And it kind of ties into what you're saying about changing perspectives. She wants to know what color the stars are from space and what is the difference between what they look like when you look at them from here.
Yeah, well, that's neat. So I haven't seen them myself, but I specifically remember Chris Hadfield describing the stars on an event I was doing. So I was on the ground, he was in space, and we were doing an event with Canadian youth. And I specifically remember him describing it to us. And he said, well, for one thing, there are way more stars in the black sky when you look out from space. So I don't know if you've experienced that, but if I live in Houston, Texas. So when I go outside my house at night and look up at the stars, I can see the brightest constellations. I can see the Big Dipper, for example, but it's a bit hard to pick out. I can definitely see Orion, for example, but I cannot see the Milky Way in any way, shape, or form from Houston. But if I go into the country where it's quite dark and I go camping, I can make out the Milky Way, just all those stars kind of in that disk that you see that is the Milky Way, all the stars of our galaxy laid out there for us. When you get above the atmosphere and you're in space, you see even more stars than you can see from the surface of the planet. So the first thing I remember Chris Hadfield saying was, it almost looks like more stars than black. So, like we look up at the sky and we see black with like little pins of light. And he said, I look up and I see stars everywhere and with black out there around amongst the stars. So it sounded to me like a little bit more like a carpet of stars. And then the other thing we know that's very different, and Chris explained this as well, is the stars don't twinkle when you're in space. So the reason that stars, we have twinkle, twinkle, little star, is because when we look at them through the atmosphere, it's the changes in the movement of the air, if you will, that cause the stars to kind of get brighter and dimmer, brighter and dimmer. We call that twinkling. That doesn't happen when you look at them from space. And I don't know specifically about the color. I think somebody told me they're a whiter, like a whiter white when you look at them from space. But I'll have to wait till I get there to tell you.
Our next question came to us in an email. It's from Anne and John Raddick, and they want to know, do you think astronauts can sustain long-term travel in space? And what is the impact of bone and muscle mass deterioration and the psychological effects on planetary travel?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I don't know what the human limit is. And I think so far we've had humans stay in space kind of around a year. Not too long ago, we had a couple of astronauts spend very close to a year. Recently, we had Christina from NASA. It wasn't the original plan, but we ended up extending her mission. So she didn't stay a full year, but it was getting pretty close to the length of that previous mission we had. So pretty close to a year. And they did really, really well. We've learned a lot on the International Space Station about maintaining a healthy body there. And so one of the things we really used to struggle with was muscle loss in space. Well, now we have better exercise equipment. We have 3 different pieces we use on board the space station. We have a treadmill with like bungee cords that pull you down, so it's sort of like running on Earth. We have a bike, so a stationary bike. And then we have another piece of equipment we call ARED, which allows us to simulate weightlifting and like with lots of weight, simulates lots of weight. So we can do like deadlifts and squats and bench press and curls, and we can put a lot of stress and strain on our muscles in a short period of time. And with that, astronauts are coming back to Earth, sometimes losing essentially no muscle mass, depending on how much time they have to work out while they're in space. You talked about bone. Bone is tricky. We have definitely curbed bone density loss by using things like the exercise primarily. So the way bones work is, if they're kind of using or losing. So if you're not using your bones, they get weak. But when you and I are on Earth and we're using our bones regularly, walking or we're exercising with them, we're actually constantly breaking them a little bit. And every time we break them, they regrow and it maintains their strength. When we break them down in space, not break them down, don't think about breaking it, but when we put strain or stress on them in space, if you think of I think of it like little I-beams inside the bone, and these things grow from one side of your bone to the other side of the bone, and they start on the outsides and they grow together, and they meet in the middle on Earth when we regrow our bone. But in space, they often don't meet in the middle, they miss. And so you have bone density in space, you can maintain a lot of your density, but because they don't connect, you don't get as much strength. So astronauts are still coming back to Earth with bones that are essentially weaker, even though we're doing better in density. So we still have more to learn there. So I think that will be a challenge. We talk a lot about the Mars mission, that 2.5-year mission. I think this is very much within the realm of what humanity, what a human team could accomplish. I think it'd be challenging, but I think we can definitely do it. We saw that lots with humans exploring our planet, over the past centuries. Some of the exploration missions they undertook were extraordinary. They went through a lot of hardship, but they were able to do it because they had a big goal in mind. And I think the goal of going to Mars and coming back alive to Earth is a big enough goal to motivate a team to really go out there and tackle that kind of challenge. I really believe we could do that. The other thing that's going to change is technology. Right now, it is 2.5-year reference mission to go to Mars and come back, just because of how the planets have to line up to do it efficiently. But in the future, if we have better engine technology, which we're already working on, in fact, CSA, Canadian Space Agency, has funded some of a really neat engine called the Vasimir engine. We built a small part of it in Canada, and it's really neat. It's a really cool plasma engine that, in theory, could take the one-way journey to Mars from about 8 months, typically, back to about 40 days. Now, that's a ways off in the future. We have a bit of work to do there, but that could technically happen with this engine one day. And you wouldn't necessarily have to wait for the planets to realign to come home either. So you might be able to do a journey to Mars and back in, maybe 6 months or a year or something like that. So that's kind of neat to think about.
Speaking of tackling new challenges, our CanGeo team was wondering how we can learn lessons in space related to climate change and how we can apply those back here at home.
Yeah, I mean, climate change is something that's really, really important to be talking about and understanding. And that's really how space plays the most critical role in climate change is from the point of view of data collection, of understanding the problem. One of the most important aspects when you need to make changes to solve a problem, you really need to understand it. And the better you understand it, the better your solutions are going to be and the more effective your solutions are going to be. When I think of climate change, the biggest factors that come to my mind are the basic needs of humanity. And so, as humans, we need access to water, we need access to food, and we need access to, a safe environment to live in. We don't want to be living in fear all the time. And climate change is very much going to impact, already is, but is going to continue to impact those basic needs of humanity. An example of this is water. where if you look at kind of the massive water events, they're happening at a higher frequency now on the planet. And it's simply because the planet is warmer. We have the measurements to look at that. Our planet is, on average warmer today than it has been in all of our lives. And so that means there's more moisture in the air. That means there's more energy to move that moisture around. It means there are bigger storms. And instead of the water being more evenly distributed around the planet, it gets concentrated. And then we have these major water events in different parts of the planet. So you end up with, not enough water in some places where we have historically had water for our communities, and then too much water in other places. And if you want to know where the water is on your planet, what's the best way to get a global picture? It's from space. You have to get outside the planet. Instead of taking, a million measurements from different places on the surface, the best way is to have a satellite that is orbiting, it's going around your planet. And typically with satellites that we look back at the Earth, what we do is we put them in an orbit that goes from south to north, like this. And then, of course, our planet is rotating underneath every day. And so a satellite in an orbit like that, we call it a polar orbit, can see the entire planet and can measure the entire planet with one satellite. It takes days, maybe closer to a month, to monitor the entire planet, depending on how wide your field of view is. But we can see the entire planet. And we can create a data set of what's going on our planet all the time. And if you add a few more satellites, you can actually map the entire planet, even in one day. It can be done. So Canada has some neat satellites that are contributing to this. RadarSat, you might have heard of this before. We're on our 3rd generation of RadarSat, a really neat technology that can look through clouds. It can look, doesn't matter what the weather is, it can always map the surface and can give us information about soil moisture, crops, ice. So we can collect a lot of data from space. And ultimately, that's going to help us make decisions about those basic needs that I was talking about before. So it's a really great thing to be thinking about. And space will definitely be part of our solution set for climate change.
Now, one of our questions that has come in is about your training. Not necessarily what do you do in your training, but we want to know what your most favorite and least favorite parts of training are.
Interesting. I know the most favorite one. I'm not sure if I know what the least favorite one is off the top of my head. I really like the spacewalk training. So I find that really fascinating. Spacewalk training is hard. We do different things for spacewalk training, but probably the coolest one we do is where we put on the real spacesuit that we use for spacewalks. We have a bunch of them that we only use in the pool here. They will never fly in space again because we've used them in the pool, but they're real suits. They're exactly the same. And we go underwater because it helps us simulate microgravity, because the suits are very heavy. They weigh a couple 100 kilograms. And so if we go underwater, we can make them neutrally buoyant. We can basically make them float in the water column. So it feels to us like we're in space and the suit is floating. And then we have mock-ups, we call them, basically models of the things we want to do spacewalks on in space. So we have a mock-up of the International Space Station underwater. And on a typical spacewalk training day, you'll go in the morning, a little before 7, you get all your tools ready that you need to go fix the thing you're going to fix that day. There's some briefings, and then you get suited up. By 9 o'clock, you're in the water. You have 6 hours to do your repair mission in the International Space Station. And then at 3 o'clock, they pull you out of the water. You get showered, and then you have a debrief. And so you're usually done by around 5 o'clock. Those are really tough, grueling days. It's physically tough. It's mentally demanding. There's a lot of preparation you do in the days leading up to it. But it's super, super fun to go do it. And it gives you a real sense of accomplishment. So I really like that. What's my least favorite? Oh, I don't know. There's a lot of, maybe like anything, there's just a lot of studying that astronauts do. And so that just requires discipline. Sometimes you might not feel like studying, learning new things, and sometimes you do, but even when you don't, you need to just dig in and do it. But I have to tell you, like, this is my dream job. Like, I love it. And I have a lot of positive training experiences because I really like what I do, and I'm very passionate about getting better at it, and one day putting those skills to use in space.
I have to ask, food while you're in space, do you eat any of that while you're training on land before you go up there?
Yeah. Yeah, we absolutely try the food. In fact, it's important to know what the available menu is, because then you can give them some of your preferences, and they will try to ship up, before your mission, more of the foods that you enjoy, just to help you with your overall morale. There's kind of a basic diet up there that we all follow, but they augment it with some of the things that you have a preference for, so that you get a little bit more of your favorites while you're on board space station. So we actually have we have these tastings, we call it, where you'll go into the food lab and they'll prepare basically a bite-sized portion of a bunch of different meals, and you'll try them and you'll kind of rate them, so that you can know what you like and what you don't like before you go.
And what's your favorite?
Um, there's really nothing that's like awesome about space food. It's not, and I'm not a foodie, so I'm not overly picky about food. So I'm quite happy. But if you've ever eaten ready-to-eat meals from the military or backpacking food that you rehydrate, um, they taste good, especially when you're hungry and you've been working hard. But they're not like gourmet meals. So there's not a lot of like really great flavor in those meals, to be honest. So I don't know. I'm quite happy with the food. I know it won't bother me, but I don't even have a favorite there.
Now, we know, you're often referred to, of course, as the likely next Canadian in space. When might that be, and what has to happen before you can actually take off?
Yeah, it's still a bit of an unknown for us when that will happen, but it's not a mystery. I mean, we all understand exactly what's happening. We currently, Canadian Space Agency has an agreement with NASA, and it was based on our extension of the International Space Station for another flight to the space station by 2024. And so we just don't know when that's going to happen. Certainly, this launch this past weekend is a very positive event to ensuring that flight will happen on time, and it could happen in 2024. I mean, that's probably the most probable case, but it could come earlier than that, and that would stem from shifting schedules, or it's just really hard to predict right now. And what I've been telling people is, until both of our commercial crew vehicles are flying regularly, we're just not in a position to actually plan that far ahead when the next Canadian's going to fly. But from my point of view, this is something that's coming. Everything is trending in the right direction. It's all very, very positive. And and someday we'll know, and then I'll have a launch date, and I'm pretty excited about that. And I know how lucky I am. I mean, I'm just a really lucky Canadian to have that opportunity to live this dream. And so I try not to take it for granted. It's a very special and unique opportunity.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Jeremy, for joining us today. We are so grateful to you and to the Canadian Space Agency for accommodating Q&A here with our audience. Is there any one-liner word of wisdom you could give to the people watching before I let you go?
A word of wisdom. What I would love to share to the Canadians watching, especially young Canadians, is just, I want to emphasize something I said earlier. There is so much. I can't fit this in one line, I'm sorry, but there's so much opportunity in space right now. And the future of space is not going to look anything like it looks today. We're going to change so many different things. We're already changing how we get to space. We're going to change the ways that we set up infrastructure in space to benefit humanity. We're going to have to tackle space junk. We have to do a better job with that in the future. All of these things are going to change in space. We're going to be going back to the moon. There is tremendous opportunity. But these opportunities are going to go to the people who have bold visions for how to leverage these things. I would just encourage Canadians to be creative. This is like a garden that's out with really fertile soil right now, and our economy of the future will also change. There are stressors on the economy right now, for example, and it's obvious and it's painful for a lot of people. But it's important that we think about setting ourselves up for the future and success as well, even amidst all of these struggles. And there's a lot of opportunity out there for Canadians. And so really take some time and during this change to think about how we might do things like we've never done before. We can really use your help.
Thank you so much, Jeremy, for joining us. Before we let everyone go, I just wanted to let you know of a couple events that we do have coming up here at Canadian Geographic. So one is June 9th. We have another round of our fun trivia game. If you heard Jeremy earlier talking about those radar stat images, some of those are probably in here, so brush up on what they are. That's June 9th at 7 p.m. Eastern. And then on June 25th, we have another one of our virtual series talks, this time with George Karunas, who is a storm chaser and an explorer. That's again at 7 p.m. Eastern. Jeremy, thank you so much again for joining us, and thank you to everybody for tuning in.
Yes, thank you so much. My only regret is I don't get to see any of you. It's better when I'm in a room. I miss seeing my fellow Canadians, and but thanks for this event today. I wish it was less of a one-way conversation, but thanks for the questions. Thanks for setting us up. It was great, and we'll see you again.
One day soon, hopefully.
All right. So long, everyone.